Hey everybody, before we get started on the video, I just wanted to add this little addendum at the beginning to say this is a re-upload of something that I did a long time ago, maybe 2 years ago now. But I had some copyright issues with Universal, so I took it down. This is the re-edited version. Hopefully it will suit the Universal copyright overlords and we won't have any issues. If we don't have any issues going forward with this, then if you check out my Patreon very soon, I'll be able to post the entire thing with some more video clips in it, more like the original version. In fact, maybe even more so than the original version. But I just had to get by with this first before we could even entertain that. So this is a hopefully YouTube-friendly version of my commentary on both Dracula movies. Thank you all for your patience. Some of you have commented and asked where this went. Well, here it is. It's back for your viewing convenience. I hope you enjoy. Please leave a comment and let me know if you want more things like this going forward. Also, I decided to go ahead and upload it in September because going forward, we're going to just go ahead and start reviewing some Halloween movies. I don't know about you, but I'm super excited for Halloween, and I can't think of one reason to wait for October. So for the rest of September and into next month, we're going to be talking about Halloween movies, and that'll include some of the Universal films and something new that I'm working on. That'll be a series sort of like my Dorian Gray reviews. So I hope you'll stay tuned and subscribe and follow me along with that, and hopefully we'll have some fun with it. But for now, enjoy the video. Thank you so much, and God bless. Hello and welcome back. I'm the Rambling Director, and today we are going to be looking at the 1931 Universal classic Dracula and the 1931 Universal classic Dracula. Now, any major classic film fan is probably already going to know that there was a Spanish production of Dracula using the same sets. Back in the 1930s, it was extremely common, rather than dubbing an English film, you would just have a Spanish cast come in and film during the nighttime after the sets were being used during the day. And so you'd have effectively two movies shot with the same script, but with different directors and different casts. And it really does give you possibly the best point-by-point comparison on how to do a movie excellently and how to just do a movie great. I would never ever besmirch the Bela Lugosi classic by saying it's anything less than great. It is a great movie. But when you see the Spanish version, you realize that it is profoundly lacking. And yeah, it could have been done better. And I think, it's all well and good to just say something can be done better, but when you have a point-by-point exact one-to-one ratio comparison, it does make it a lot easier to directly compare them and illustrate exactly what you mean. You can see that matte painting shot there with the carriage is the exact same in both productions, and you'll notice that in a lot of the insert shots, actually, they do that. They use exact shots, the exact same shots between the English and the Spanish production. This is one of my favorite differences because you can start to see from the very beginning the difference in the way these films were shot and in the difference in what dialogue was edited out. And you can really tell that in the Spanish production, they seem to care a lot more about characters. You can already see that this scene is going to be about twice as long as the English counterpart for the scene. So you see we keep this wide angle much longer, but when we start cutting into close-ups, the close-ups are far more filmic. Oh, there it is, Walpurgis Night. Now, St. Walpurga, on that night, the powers of evil have full sway. That is what they say in this. And you can see, tonight all doors are locked and we shall pray to the Virgin. And if you notice, when they make the sign of the cross, they add in the little kiss. There you go. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, kiss. Now, Spanish Catholics do that because what they're actually doing is kissing the cross that has been made. You'll see that a lot in devotionals, like you'll have a wooden cross in your hands and you kiss the center where Jesus' head would have been. So that is something specific to Spanish Catholics. I've never seen any other group of Catholics do it. English-speaking Catholics typically don't. Now, something about that St. Walpurga's Day. Now, in the book, it was actually the eve of St. George's Day, which is far more English. St. Walpurga that name just adds an air of the sort of Carpathian Mountains. Look at that in the English version. You see that reveal on Renfield. It's treated almost as though we haven't seen Renfield before, and almost like that is his character introduction. It's a far better introduction than the Spanish production does. However, you see the obvious problem that it's not a character introduction. We just met Renfield a few minutes ago. I do like the framing of the Spanish version far better. Most people do tend to agree that the Spanish version is better when they've seen it, and I think a lot of that comes to the visual style. Look at the English version. It looks cheaper. Why does it look cheaper? Well, because there's not as many people in the background. It's a lovely set, but ultimately you could have gone out, outdoors and found any number of locations that looked very similar. But that extra sense of community, the fact that this place feels very lived in and very full of people, it really adds an element of expense to the production. Now, you might say, well, 1930s, of course, it's going to be cheaper, but actually, some of the best and most lavish productions ever made were in the 30s and 40s. And so it doesn't have to be that way. You can see already we're getting some major departures here. And I think actually the Spanish version does still play it better, because although they have a lot more intensive, I should say, in the English production, there's also a lot of very clunky dialogue. And at least the Spanish subtitles are not so clunky. I can't understand Spanish. I've always wanted to learn, but I can't say how clunky their dialogue is in Spanish, but the subtitles make it seem far more straight to the point. This guy, for instance, with the glorious mustache, I wish I had a mustache like that, he actually says, we people of the mountains believe vampires live at the castle. And I like the way in the Spanish version, he just says, vampires live at the castle. He doesn't say it in those exact words, but he just says, the spirits of evil, they walk abroad. It's far more poetic. Whereas in the English version, I don't know anybody who would talk about that, about their belief system that way. I wouldn't suggest it as a, it makes it sound more like a superstition. Does that make sense? I know that's probably a silly way to have phrased it, but I'm sure you get what I'm saying. I also like that it's nighttime. Now, in the Spanish version, Renfield has stayed until the night has fallen, and now he's getting in his cart, and now he's getting ready to drive away. And if you notice, they do an excellent day for night shot here. And look, you can see what I'm talking about. By just looking at the sky in the two shots between English and Spanish, it's probably the same shot. Oh, I love this. Do you really believe they're vampires who come out of their tomb and roam about looking for blood? I've seen the victims. And she's like swoons, and the other woman's nonsense. The whole time that woman keeps saying nonsense. I love it. You just get such attention to character. Look at that. See, they've darkened out the sky to make it a day for night shot. But in the original, you can see it's pretty much the same shot. It's probably the same shot. But they've made it day for night. Now we get to the carriage ride. And I actually really respect the Spanish version for doing something that I don't think was in the script. Or if it was not used in the English production. In the book, it describes that Jonathan, of course, it was the one who went to Transylvania, not Renfield in the book, but Renfield takes the place of Jonathan in this, and it says in the book that he sees a ring of fire. You see there's the fire right there, casting spotlights into the sky, and that the blue flames actually represent, in the English version, look at what a great matte shot. That's a beautiful matte painting, isn't it? That the fires actually represent the days that on St. George's Day that you can see where treasure has been buried. But it's marked by blue flame. Now this is one of the most iconic sequences of both. But if you look in the back, you can actually see there's almost like a flare in the background of the English version, putting out smoke. In the Spanish version, it's much more downplayed. And I've noticed over the years that this actually in the Spanish version doesn't make a lot of sense. I'll talk more about that in a minute, but I want to point something out real quick. Look at the English version. I think it pops up there first. There's the vampire bug. Look at that. The vampire bug. Have you ever seen anything so adorable? It's about to show up in the Spanish version now after this possum. Oh, but you can see wonderful. There's the vampire bug. Wonderful Bela Lugosi. Absolutely incredible screen presence. It is the thing that the Spanish version has over, the English version has over on the Spanish version in spades, is Bela Lugosi just has an incredible screen presence. And even the way he moves is kind of ominous.
Now, I noticed in the Spanish version, that's not the coffin we saw in the close-up. You remember, as we panned in, we saw his hand coming out of a different coffin. And I think that that's because they used an alternate take from the English version when editing and didn't realize that Dracula was actually coming out of a different coffin in the Spanish version. So they included it, but it becomes a continuity error. Oh, look at both of them look so creepy and in such different ways. It's kind of remarkable, isn't it? Now here's one of the elements where the English version has certain shots that look more filmic than the Spanish version. But the ones where the Spanish version chooses those big wide shots feels more filmic in a way because it seems like a tableau shot. Whereas the English production, it almost feels like a technological limitation. But then, you'll notice in the Spanish version, there's a lot more close-ups, a lot more mediums. And as the film goes on, you see, look at this, we're looking right into Renfield's face. We can see his eyes. And there's a really tight close-up. But look there, you can't see Dwight Frye's eyes hardly at all in the way they've chosen. Wow, speaking of eyes, gosh, Bela Lugosi has some of the best eyes, doesn't he? Lugosi and Karloff had two of the most outrageously beautiful eyes I think ever put to film. But look at that. You can't read Dwight Frye's expression as the character of Renfield, can you? Because he's so far away. And the English version frequently keeps you at an arm's length. It's not like a Kubrick film where that's a strength either. I think that is the most profound weakness. And the reason why the Spanish version shines so brightly is because you get such a sense of these characters and who they are. Oh, gosh. And look, there's that beautiful matte painting shot again, but now we have the little carriage transposed into it. Now you can see we've already gotten to the bat outside the carriage well earlier in the Spanish version. Renfield has such a big bug eyes. I want to talk about the two actors who play Renfield in this, but I'm waiting until we get to a point where there's a little less happening. But you can see one of them looks kind of wide-eyed and curious. The other one looks scared. And I think that is one of the strengths of the film. But look, even just different camera angles, what a difference it makes. Or as Dracula might say, what beautiful music they make. My Dracula's a little Italian. Forgive me, I'm a little rusty. Look at that. You can see the shock on Renfield's face in the Spanish version. But in the English, it was just a little too far away. And I actually am one who likes wider shots, letting the audience do some of the editing for you. But I do have to say, there is just something about the closeness of the Spanish production. It just seems a little closer, a little bit more intimate than the English production does. And that's a strength. That's just another beautiful matte shot, isn't it? Look at that. The painted windows, the ceiling. It's gorgeous. Now, I actually think, if you notice, the two Renfields are two of the only characters in the film who are dressed pretty much exactly the same. The others have some difference, and I think that they kept him in the same costume so that they could use that matte shot between the two. Now look at the Spanish version. This is one of the greatest character introductions you'll ever see in a film, and it's normally the thing that most people point to as the example of the differences between the Spanish and English, is the introduction of Dracula. That was an incredible crane shot that they were able to get because they just had the extra time to play around on set because they were filming at night. Everybody had went home. Whereas Dracula, in the English version, relies very heavily on that shot of him coming out of the coffin, which is a great character introduction too, but it just kind of happens. It just shows up on screen. But there's something about the extreme push-in that you get when it's almost like the camera is pushing you towards something you don't necessarily want to go toward. Robert Zemeckis did this in his film The Walk, where it's like he pushes you slowly over the edge of the Twin Towers. You get a lot more dialogue, specifically like straight from the book, in the Spanish version, which is odd, isn't it? You would think since it was an English novel, you would get more in the English version, but you don't. Now, there just is no competition for a creepy, intimidating person between Carlos Valerius and, listen, forgive me, I'm not Spanish. I know I'll probably butcher some of these names. It's no offense to anybody. I'm a little a Native American guy from Tennessee, okay? You can't expect a whole lot from me, okay? But that being said, Bela Lugosi, although he's far more intimidating, I think, and he has a greater stage presence, of course, being a stage actor, I think Carlos Valerius has the benefit of being closer to sort of what I think of when I think of Christopher Lee in the Hammer productions of Dracula, where Dracula is a very urbane character. He seems very at home. He's just a normal guy. He has a creepy edge to him, but he just seems more like the sort of person you could just talk to. He doesn't seem that out of ordinary. He just seems eccentric. Whereas Bela Lugosi, there is just no way anybody is seeing him and doesn't know that there's something terribly wrong. I really love this line in particular. It goes on for a fair bit longer than it does with Lugosi, where the line is shortened. They cut out the first half of it, but it's a grand line. Now let's talk about those actors who play Renfield while there's a little less going on. Just notice the attention. Dwight Frye in the English version did not notice the door closing by itself, but watch over here. Watch in the Spanish version. Pablo Alvarez Rubio is the guy's name who plays the Spanish Renfield, and there's just something so anxious about his character. He's just so anxiously involved in everything that is happening. There's almost a sort of Buster Keaton-esque physicality to him. By the way, I'm not saying comedically, but if you watch a lot of Buster Keaton films like I do, you know that there's a certain physicality to Buster Keaton where you could tell everything he was feeling and thinking just by the way he shrugged his shoulders. He's very good at that. Just elevating his body language just slightly. Look at this great pull-out shot in the Spanish version. In the English version, it just cuts to a similar shot. But in this version, we get to see a pan out to get the full expanse of this gorgeous set. Good golly, what a gorgeous set. You don't see set pieces like this anymore, do you? Nowadays, it's all green screen. Which, by the way, I'm not against like a lot of people. But, it still is marvelously beautiful when you see it done for real, isn't it? I also think there are moments when Carlos, I'm just going to call him Carlos because I get tongue-tied when I say his last name. Carlos, as the Spanish Dracula, actually does out-creep Bela Lugosi just a little bit. And I think that comes down to the fact that he's so normal the rest of the time. I do love this shot. Look at the English version. Those are some great shots where it's a wider shot than in the Spanish version where they do like an extreme close-up on his eyes. In the English version, it's further away. But they do this very unnatural lighting effect. And you do see it once in a while in the Spanish version, but it's mostly these profound close-ups of eyes. But look at that. In the Spanish version, he doesn't look creepy, per se. He just kind of looks like he has a great disdain for this man. And almost like pretending he likes him and that they're friends is almost kind of painful to him. And I like that interpretation. I also like that Renfield in this version, he just tucks in. He makes that food look delicious. Now, again, just look at the difference. Dwight Frye, who I actually do think is one of the great character actors, underrated character actors, I should say, of all time. He's so good. But that being said, he is a character actor, and he has a very flamboyant personality. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you can just tell the difference when you look at the Spanish version, where Renfield acts more like a normal person in the beginning. He doesn't act like a sort of a dandy, which is how Dwight Frye plays him, is sort of a dandy. Whereas Pablo Rubio plays him, look at what a grand shot that is. Oh, those eyes! That's awesome! And then look, rather than turning away and shielding himself from the cross, he draws back and you get to see that first little bit of disgust. It's a little bit less, hey, look at me, I'm a vampire. I also like, if you look at Bela Lugosi's costume, which was, of course, a classic, and now everybody imagines Dracula dressing that way. But look at Carlos Valerius's outfit. Without that little medallion around his neck, there's something more casual, something more everyday, middle-aged man living in a castle. as everyday as that can be. I never drink wine. It's a grand line. It's not in the book, though. In fact, in the book, he says, I have already eaten, and I do not sup. Referring to supper, of course. Now, I really love that pan-around shot in the English version. That's an excellent shot. And it does kind of give a vibe of like a revelation to Renfield that something is not quite right here. It's the same sort of parallaxing effect that Michael Bay does beautifully. And now, of course, we cut out the Spanish version because the English version condenses all of this down. And I think this is probably the greatest strength of the Spanish version and the greatest weakness of the English version. Besides the fact that the English version is shot as if they're ashamed of these sets, yet ironically shows more of them. I don't know how exactly to put that across. It's shot more like it's cheap, like it was done on a budget. Which the Spanish version is shot more like a film with a massive budget. But if you notice, the Spanish version, one of its great strengths is that it sort of takes the accordion of this story and stretches it out, lets it breathe. It is, I think, 20 or 25 minutes longer than the English version. And a part of the great strength of that, you might think, well, wouldn't that make it drag more? Actually, no. Because the thing is, the parts of the English version that needed to be hurried up a little bit are stretched out way too long. And the parts in the English version that should have been lingered on for, the maximum suspense and scare effect are hastened. They're picked up like they were afraid they'd get censored. Even though this was before the Hays censorship code came around. Whereas in the Spanish version, they take a real time to let you feel the buildup of these creepy moments. I mean, look at this. You get a real sense of wide shot creepiness, and we're about to cut into close-up claustrophobia in a moment. And when we do that, you can just tell the difference. Both versions do Renfield's revelation that something is wrong. Great, but look, it's motivated in the Spanish version by the automatic door. It's not motivated by anything in the English version. Or perhaps I should say, it's not really clearly motivated by anything. You can see Renfield just kind of sits down. He looks around. You get the idea that maybe there's something in the room. He looks a little uncomfortable, like maybe he's a little dizzy. Maybe he's going out to get some air. But in the Spanish version, he is choking. And if you have ever had an anxiety attack, you understand what that feels like. And so they both Renfields go to the door, but you can just tell there's a huge difference. Dwight Frye's Renfield is just kind of woozy. And then he just passes out of nowhere. But look at the Spanish version. He looks down in the courtyard. He sees Dracula about to get into his coffin. In the background, you can see the brides of Dracula standing behind Renfield. Look at that. They're right back there. And now it's all too much for him. And he passes out. And the brides are waiting to come and feast on him. And man, I don't know about you. I wouldn't mind having my blood sucked by them. That was a bad joke. Sorry. Whereas in the English version, Dracula comes in closer to the book and rebukes them away. Now, the Spanish version understands that at that moment, if it's going to be scary and intense, it has to go snappy. It has to be fast editing. Renfield, reaction, Renfield, Dracula, Renfield, ladies in the back, ladies waiting to feast on him. Oh, he's choking, closer up shot, and he passes out. It has to be intense, whereas in the English version, it's so leisurely that you really don't get a sense of how scary that moment is. Now we get one of my favorite moments in both films, the Vesta, which is a ship bound for England. Now, in the book, it was the Demeter. That was the name of the ship. But in the movies, they call it the Vesta. And you can see both of these use a mixture of footage. But in the Spanish version, it seems like most of it was shot for the Spanish version because they only have 2 or 3 actors. That's actually closer to the book, believe it or not, because in the book, we see, actually like in the English version, how we see Renfield helping him out. Look at these shots in the Spanish version, the reaction shots. Just beautiful. Remember that in the book, Dracula picks off the crew one by one until the captain is the only man left alive. Now look at these reaction shots. Oh, and Renfield. Renfield's shots here. Oh, in the Spanish version. You can't hear it right now, but his laughter is a scream of laughter. You get this traumatized man shaking with fear, the captain in disbelief of what he's seen, back to Renfield laughing, and his maniacal laughter is in the background of this whole scene. It builds so much tension. My gosh, although it is half the length in the Spanish version as it is in the English version, actually a little less than half the length, you get across a lot more because the intensity is so great that it's just unbelievable. Now, that's a great creepy shot of Dracula, but nobody notices him. And although it is kind of creepy that we cut to the wide shot of the ship and it's like, oh, we can never know the horror, I wanted to see the horror, and the Spanish version gave me that. And look at that. The Spanish version cuts right to it. The captain dead, tied to the wheel of the ship. Actually, in the Spanish version, I don't think they actually say he's tied. They say his fingers are stiffened to the ship like he died of fright. Okay, it's fine in both, but in the book, he tied himself to the wheel. I like that where the English version feels the need to build up to it, the Spanish version cuts to a moment of horror. It's almost like a jump scare, but without music. And you can't look away from it because it's too quick, you know? Whereas the Spanish version does that. The English version builds up to it, and it's not a particularly good build-up either. In both versions, we get sort of a pan across. Now we get the first glimpse of Renfield as a truly insane man, and you can see the difference between the English and Spanish is really a matter of taste. Dwight Frye is horrifyingly scary down there, just staring up going, but I do love Pablo Rubio's, he just cracks up, you know? It's like he just can't hold it in anymore. He can't hold on to sanity anymore. And it's like when that door opens and he sees other people, he loses it completely. And I love the sense of energy of that. But that's one that I couldn't pick a favorite because I also love Dwight Frye in the entire film. And I love him standing there with that little mischievous laugh. If you've seen Dracula Dead and Loving It, the parody of these movies by Mel Brooks, then you know that the Renfield in that version, he takes an absolute wealth of pointers from Dwight Frye's performance, and one of them is that laugh. He goes, hey, 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 I won't hurt you. All I want is your life. It's great. Now, in the English version, we get this little moment of him with a flower girl, probably a Cockney flower girl like Eliza Doolittle, and he just preys on her in the street. Now, you could say that's sort of social commentary, and it works, because who would care about a poor girl in the street, am I right? But in the Spanish version, I think it's a little bit more subtle than that. There's still an element of mystery to the Spanish version that sort of follows the book a little closer. I do think it's creepy to watch Bela Lugosi walk away like he hasn't a care in the world, knowing what he just did. But I do find it hard to believe that in a street, we just showed people walking by in the street. It is strange for me to believe that nobody would notice a guy who looks like he's necking with a girl against a column. You know, nobody stops and goes, most unorthodox. Nothing? Nothing? You can see the English version started a great tracking shot there, but it cuts away. The Spanish version goes all the way with it. Oh yeah, baby, that's what I'm talking about. Look at that. Beautiful shot. And then we wing into Dracula, center frame. He looks around so we know who he is and where he's going. And now he's going into the opera. Great shot. And everything from this point forward in this opera scene is better in the Spanish version. Look, we have some stock footage, which I believe was taken from the 1925 Lon Chaney Phantom of the Opera movie. I know the end part definitely was. In the English version, they're just in the aisle, and you get sort of a long shot of Dracula being led down to the box, right? And he's led past some people. We get a nice little shot of the box here with Dr. Seward, John, Mina, and Lucy. But look, there's something kind of cheaper, again, about the way that it's filmed, where we don't see a lot of the audience. But in the Spanish version, we get this epic walk and talk Aaron Sorkin shot following Dracula in to the hallway behind the boxes. Now, if you notice in the English version and Spanish version, there's another key difference here. And that is that Dracula in the English version really never gives commands. It's all in his eyes. So we can tell that he has somebody under his trance, like in a trance under his spell. But we don't hear what he's saying. And I understand the argument, show, don't tell. That's the nature of movies. So the fact that the Spanish version has him verbally telling the orders, you could see as a downgrade. But honestly, I kind of like it, because there's something more controlling in the Spanish version about the way he tells people out loud. Like, he's not even afraid that people are going to overhear him. Look at this great shot. Dr. Seward and the maid, and then in the background between them is Dracula. More close-ups. Loads more close-ups in the Spanish versions. So we can see a lot more of their eyes, and that gives us a better idea of the people themselves. Now, this is something I've always hated in the English version. I hated it the first time I saw it as a kid. Look at the way they've staged this. There's a step going up into the box, right? And this entire conversation, Bela Lugosi is on the bottom step. So he looks not only shorter, but he's the furthest back in the shot, which makes him visually the least important person in the shot. But in the Spanish version, they're not only side by side, but Dracula's a little closer forward, and he's taller than Seward, which means he dominates the shot without even having to try. That is great filmmaking. Now, of course, everybody just stands up and greets him in both versions. The English version has some nice close-ups here, but they're not used very well. And the wide shot in the Spanish version is much tighter, so we get more of a sense of their faces. Whereas the wide shot in the English version is so wide, and the women are turned away almost the entire time. In fact, John is even turned away most of the time. Whereas in the Spanish version, the eye lines point to whoever they're talking to. And everybody, whenever somebody is talking, they're facing either completely profile or a little bit towards the camera. And that's just far better storytelling. It's also a much more pleasing shot. Of course, the Spanish version cuts to a wider shot, but in this case, it's just to show that there is a crowd there. Whereas in the English version, they don't seem particularly interested in giving us a sense of scale. Now, the English reverse shots here, they're good, but look at these reverse shots in the Spanish version, where the men have sat down. So now the women and the men are in an equal playing field. The women are still a little shorter, so it shows the men are more dominant in the scene. But it still allows us to shift our focus whenever one person takes control, right? That's really good. And because we're now focusing on twofers, head and shoulder shots effectively, or waist-up shots at least, back and forth between the two, it's not like in the English version where it's almost full-body shots. We just don't get enough sense of who these people are because we can't see them. It's like a stage play. And I do know that both these versions were based more heavily on the stage production that Bela Lugosi starred in, rather than on the book, and that's fine. But the Spanish version translates it fully into the cinematic medium by having closer shots. You don't have to have the audience 30 yards away. Have them in the people's faces. That's all we need to do to make it cinematic. I also like that in this last little bit of dialogue, the lights come down and we get to see them talk in the dark a little bit. Yeah, see, that's a ballet scene from the 1925 Phantom. Now, trust me, I completely know that, there's nothing wrong with wider shots, and that's fine, and a lot of older movies did do that. But I just think, it shows how far ahead, comparatively, the Spanish version is. Look at the shots comparison here. Lucy and Mina have so much headroom, it's ridiculous. They almost look like television newscasters in the 80s, but in the Spanish version, this is shot like a movie. And it pulls back into another very nice cinematic shot, continues to pull back into a wide shot, but it's with the goal of including the door. And even though they have a lot of headspace in this last element of this shot, which we're coming up on right here, you see, the frame is still very evenly placed, and there's a lot of business, a lot of busyness going on in the frame. And so it seems very full-bodied. It all seems very interesting what we're watching. It doesn't get boring. Whereas there are some shots in the English film that just feel boring. And I hate to say that because I love the English film. And I think the performances carry the English film more than anything else, to tell you the truth. But I just love the way the framing is done in the Spanish version. I mean, look at how commonplace that English framing is of her opening the window. It's so commonplace. But in the Spanish version, there's this beautiful angle that includes the bed, and now, of course, she's stripping off, and we see Dracula's eyes widen as if he's intensely sexually interested in her. And that's an element of the book that, unfortunately, it would be easy to lose, and we do lose it in the 1931 English version. But in the Spanish version, there's a real ripe sexiness to the Spanish version, right down to what the women were wearing. If you notice Lucy in that nightgown, you could see her panties through that. That was something that the English probably would not have been willing to attempt to get away with, even though it was before the Hays Censorship Code. You know, it took a very brave movie like the Frederick Marsh Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde film to pull off something like that. You know, you had to be just flat out daring in what you were willing to do and what you were willing to try to get by with. And look at that. 2 great shots of 2 great Draculas. Both intimidating. But you can see the difference is the English version went with the shadows and the stance, the posture to make it scary. Whereas the Spanish version, he fills up the whole screen. His hands, his face, his whole body craning over you. There's something very intensely creepy about that. The fact that he fills up the whole frame, baby. That's what I'm talking about. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. And down he goes. Now, as we can see, Lucy dies very, very early on in the movie. And really, in the book, it's far more Lucy's story than it is Mina's. Now you can tell that the wide shot with the students in the little pews there was used to open the Spanish version because it was actually an excerpt from the English version. In the Spanish, it stays on a tight shot of these 4 doctors. Notice also we see the wound on Lucy's neck, and we never see vampire wounds in the English version. This next part I've had to edit a little differently. So first what we're going to do is watch the original version of these 2 scenes. In the Spanish, we've cut to Dr. Van Helsing looking at the blood. We just saw her dead on the operating table, right? And we're already hearing about vampires and stuff in the Spanish version. And that is because it makes more sense to cut from Lucy dying straight to Van Helsing, right? But in the English version, in between, we have inserted Renfield in the asylum trying to eat a bug, and Martin in this really nice shot here taking the very hilariously fake spider and throwing it out the window. I love Dwight Frye's the way he plays Renfield, the way he reacts to certain things. Oh, Martin. He's so funny. I think he knew that his role had to be played as much for comedy as seriousness, because there's not a whole lot of comedy in it if you don't count Martin. And Martin is so over the top with his comedy that at times it's almost insulting. That being said, I love Martin. He's a great character. Oh gosh, Dwight Frye's faces, some of them are just amazingly creepy. I think that's actually why Peter MacNicol was cast as Renfield in the Dracula Dead and Loving It spoof. Now you can see we cut to Dr. Van Helsing, right after we've met Renfield in the asylum. And we're still in Van Helsing here in the Spanish version, but we are about to cut around and we get the same sort of shot here. Yep, panning in on the Seward Sanitarium. There we go. And you can tell that this was probably an alternate take from the English production, which has been put in because of the way it's edited. It just doesn't have quite as much of a flow to it, and you can just tell there's a little differences here and there. And when we come around here, it cuts very abruptly to Renfield, and this time he's screaming and trying to climb his way out of the bars, or so it seems. But then you start to notice as it comes in closer, you see the spider web. So they've actually done a far better visual job of telling the story by hooking you in. What the heck is happening? And then, oh wait, don't take it away from me. There's a spider web. What's happening? Oh, I see. He's graduated from eating spiders. Let me try that again. He's graduated from eating flies to eating spiders. That was difficult. Now, the guy who plays Martin in the Spanish version is far more over the top than the Martin in the English version. But I do think the best and most hilarious part about it is hearing somebody talking in the Spanish language, attempting to do a Cockney accent in Spanish. That's pretty amazing. Now we're going to do a re-edit. Let's see that again, and we're going to see the English scenes swapped around so we can do a direct comparison. Now it's going to be harder to do this later on because the film's editing changes so much between films and scenes are intercut so differently between the two films that this is really one of the only scenes that I can do this for, but I did want to give a direct comparison. So we can see how it started off in a close-up, but immediately goes back into a wide shot in the English version. Now, of course, proper film grammar had not been fully developed at this point, so you can only blame the directors so much. But Tod Browning did seem to have an emphasis on wider shots, more unloaded of a scene. And he very often played the most important moments in wide shots, whereas George Melford, the director of the Spanish production, he was very, very good at picking the exact moments to cut into close-ups and playing them as the most important scenes, the most important shots in the scenes. Whereas the Tod Browning film, the English film, it almost seems sporadic. The cutting into close-ups almost seems like he just wants to add visual variety and didn't really know how else to do it. I would also like to remark, I think Tod Browning only got the job of directing Dracula because of the film London After Midnight, which is a lost film now. It was a silent film with Lon Chaney. It still is considered to be like the holy grail of lost films. It's Lon Chaney as a vampire. You can't get much cooler than that. Of course, he wasn't really a vampire in that production. He was actually playing a character playing a vampire, but that's completely besides the point. But when you really look at this, when you notice the differences side by side, you can tell that George Melford frequently cut into close-ups specifically to emphasize a point. Some of the most important elements are close-ups. And that just shows how much George Melford was ahead of his time. Because now in modern film grammar, literally, when I say grammar, I mean that. Film is a language. It's a visual language. And a close-up is a bit like underlining something. That's why when you see filmmakers who are pretty new to the craft, they cut into close-ups way too much. You know, they're cutting to close-ups of everything. If somebody picks up a sandwich, they cut to a close-up of the person picking up the sandwich and then cut back to the wide shot. And you're just sitting there wondering, like, okay, 2 scenes later, when the sandwich was not important to the story, why did we get that close-up? Now we get Seward and Van Helsing talking about the case and talking about Renfield specifically. Because Van Helsing believes at first that Renfield is the vampire. I really love the use of these shots because you can see it's a very, very brief cutaway to Renfield coming in. But in the Spanish version, we pan out to see them come in together. And while we get some good close-ups in the English version, again, it just doesn't seem as earned as it does in the Spanish version. And look, when we cut into a close-up in the Spanish version, it's a tighter close-up. The English version of this shot is, kneecaps and up. The Spanish version, waist and up, with barely any head space above them. Now we cut to a wide shot again, all things being equal. And now we see the scene unloaded again. Look at the visual variety of these shots. We see Renfield boxed in between Seward and Van Helsing, and of course Martin is just off screen boxing him off from the other side. That's beautiful. Whereas in the English version, it seems like a one-on-one between Van Helsing and Renfield, and Seward's just kind of there for the ride. And when we cut to that reverse shot, we see Seward and Van Helsing effectively equal in the shot, Van Helsing just having a slight dominance. And now, where in the English version we cut to Dracula coming out of his crypt, in the Spanish version we get this fantastic scene, which is not in the English version at all. Renfield sees a fly, and he goes over to get it. And it becomes a very quiet moment. Nobody's talking, we're just watching, we're waiting. And he got it. He got it, and he's so pleased with himself, and he's gulping, and he's oh, I'm going to eat it. And then he looks up and he realizes that he's lost control of himself and he has completely gave the game away. And then he, in an effort to save himself, lets it go. And Van Helsing, gosh, the actor who plays Van Helsing is just, he really is fantastic. His name is Eduardo Arazamina, I believe is how it's called. But I'm just going to call him Eduardo for the rest of the film because, again, I just can't pronounce some of these names. I don't want to insult anybody by saying it wrong. Again, I just love in the Spanish version how the other actors, they're blocked to constantly be closing in around Renfield. See, the English version has already gotten to the wolfsbane, but in this version, we're still interrogating him. What would you have done with that fly if I had not been here, Renfield? And Martin interjects a lot more. It makes Martin seem more like a third wheel, and I think, or I guess a fourth wheel in this case, and it makes him seem like better comic relief because he's always poking his nose in where it doesn't belong. And then we get the reaction of Renfield and Van Helsing and Seward looking at him like, man, can you just shut up? Look at this. Watch. You see exactly what I'm talking about here. Cut to the two men looking at him, very ill-amused. Cut back to Martin, and he's like, oh, yeah, wow, I thought it was funny. Wonderful. And now we're going to start intercutting, and this is one of the great strengths of the Spanish version. It takes a lot of scenes that are separate in the English version and intercuts between them. So we cut to Mina and John Harker talking on the mezzanine here, and they're talking, and we get a build-up that something is wrong and we don't know what it is. And that builds up to the dream scene later on, because now we have an establishment of what is happening. So when we meet Mina later, talking to John about her dream, we've cut in and we have seen her, and we already have a little bit of a sense that we know her, and that helps us. Oh, by the way, I should say, he's not John in this version, he is Juan, which makes perfect sense if you're going to change that name to a Spanish equivalent, Juan, John, okay, perfectly fine. Where it gets crazy is that Mina's name is changed to Ava, which has no resemblance. You would think they would just put an accent in there and make it Mina or something, Mina, something a little bit more Spanish, but like, they say Renfield. I don't know, they don't change his name to like Reno or something, They leave it Renfield and Van Helsing and Dr. Seward. They say Lucia. Why not change your name to just say your name differently? Just say Mina. Mina. I don't know. I don't know where the accent would fall in Spanish, but I like that. We get them coming in now and going to the living room, and now they're going to sit and have a seat together, and that builds up to the moment that we knew was coming, right? And we get to see Dracula coming through the shrubs there. So we get an introduction. I also love the fact that Carlos Valerius, he actually wears his top hat as Dracula. There's barely any scenes where Bela Lugosi wears his top hat. Now, of course, we're getting sort of a recap of the English version here, because the Spanish scene has taken so much longer. Look, again, that triangular blocking to keep Renfield boxed in. Even though it's a wide shot, it makes us feel somewhat claustrophobic. Every time Renfield's about to reveal anything, we see the bat, or we hear the howls, and it's almost supernatural. It's like Dracula's everywhere. He always knows. And look at Renfield. He's crouching in the corner. He's scared. You can get a sense that he is really terrified of his master. Look how he plays with the armrest, and he chews on it. He looks like a real madman. Somebody who really has a terrible mental illness. That is what Renfield looks like in the Spanish version. In the English version, he looks more like, again, a character of a madman, whereas Pablo Rubio just plays him perfectly. And although I love Dwight Frye, I have to say, if I was giving points for it, the point would go to the Spanish Renfield for behaving like a much more complex character. Now, in the Spanish version, it's never said to be wolfsbane, but it's kind of implied. It's an unnamed herb. Watch this. This is incredible. Look at this piece of acting from Pablo Rubio. Oh, it's incredible. You know too much to live. It's great. I mean, that is a man scared for his life. And now, whereas Dwight Frye plays him as almost angry. You know too much to live, Van Helsing. Dr. Seward even reacts like he's angry. Renfield. Whereas Renfield, in the Spanish version, you feel more sorry for him, and it's important that you do, because the ending of Renfield's character, the climax of his character, is very, very different in the Spanish version than it is in the English version. And I think it possibly was the single point that watching the Spanish version for the first time made me think, yeah, that's my favorite version. Because the ending of Renfield's character, in fact, the ending in every way is better in the Spanish version. But we'll get to that. I shouldn't get ahead of myself. Now we get one final little moment with Seward and Van Helsing. Again, Eduardo, I won't say his name again, Eduardo, the man who plays Van Helsing. I think he actually is better than Edward von Sloan in several ways, especially when comparing him to the book. Van Helsing in the book had a very fatherly, almost loving nature about him, and you never, not really, I mean, once in a while you kind of see it, but you really never get that from Edward Van Sloan as Van Helsing in the English production. He's far more like a wise old sage in the English version. That's something I love about the Spanish production, is that he can go from father to stern disciplinarian to you have to trust me here or everything we're doing is for naught. You know, he drives home a certain sense of, just like Renfield, a certain anxiety, a certain anxiousness to his performance that you just don't get in the English version. There's never a point where Van Helsing in the English production seems anything less than in control. There's maybe one moment where you get kind of a moment where maybe he's not fully in control, but it's very quick and it ends very quickly. You see, in the English version here, Renfield visits Dracula in his cell, and Renfield is like, "Oh no, master, please, please, master." But that scene comes later in the Spanish version. There is an equivalent. It's not quite the same scene. In the English version, we see Mina. Now, if you notice, there was a really bizarre cut there, right? And if you notice, Dracula also looked out the door, and there was a shadow, like somebody was walking out the door. That's actually because there was a colossal mistake in the editing of this film. And actually, this shot was out of sequence. It's almost like this scene wasn't planned, like it was built in the editing room. Because the Spanish version of this scene shows the maid leaving the room, and I believe that it was shot that way in the English version too, and they tried to edit it together. Because now we just cut in and Mina has had her dream. Whereas in the Spanish version, there's a mystery to it. And actually, I think Helen Chandler, who plays Mina in the English version, is gorgeous too. I mean, just a gorgeous woman. A fantastic actress. But she has more of a homely sort of beauty to her. And Lupita Tovar, you can tell that not only was she cast because she is an exceptionally great actress. I mean, just wonderful actress. But also because there is a sexual element to the Spanish Dracula, which was there in the book. And I believe they were trying to feed through into the film in little ways. And there's just a voluptuous beauty about Lupita Tovar. And they put her in some very revealing stuff. And I think they did that specifically to add back an element of that sexual eroticism that is fraught throughout the book, but hinted at very subtly in ways. It's not really until Jack Seward and Van Helsing and Quincy and his name escapes me, Arthur. It's not until they're going into Lucy's tomb to stake her when it is very blatant, and Jack continually uses the word voluptuous. When you realize that part of the appeal of a vampire is a sexual thing. There is an element of dominance that we get even to this day in things like 50 Shades of Grey. You know, there's a reason it was so popular. It's because dominance and submissiveness, I'll say it that way, dominance and submissiveness, you know, flirtatiousness, going back and forth between dominating each other. That is an element that has always been there. And I think vampires, no pun intended, they prey on that. We can see this moment is far shorter in the English version, but the Spanish version is focusing on relationships. We're seeing the relationship between Mina and her dad. We're seeing the horrifying worry that he has. And again, look, even though we're not seeing it in close-up right now, that wound is ugly. You can see that it is an angry wound in her neck. the English version, it's almost, again, like they were afraid to show it. And I've never understood that. Because the Hays censorship code didn't come along until later. At this point, they could have done it. But they didn't. Again, just look at Helen Chandler, though, as Mina. She is really adorable, isn't she? There's almost a childlike innocence to her, which is very sweet. And for the way they were choosing to play it, it really does work well. Now, look in the Spanish version. He doesn't have his cape or anything. He walks in with his tuxedo on, his coat and tails, and already you can tell there's just something different. I think it's maybe because his clothes don't quite fit him as well as Bela Lugosi's does. It might also be his posture. There's just something about Carlos Valerius that he seems very normal. Whereas when Bela Lugosi walks into a room, you instantly get a sense that something supernatural is happening. And I think that really just comes down to a matter of taste. But if you look here, something that I've always picked on in the English and Spanish production, actually, the English just went off, but if you were paying attention, you would have noticed it. In the English version, Van Helsing discovers that Dracula has no reflection by accident. He looks over and he just notices it. And then throughout a good half of the scene, he's just looking into the mirror back and forth. And at a certain point, it's like, I think we kind of get it. Like, you don't need to keep showing it to us over and over again. And he even reaches out and stops Jonathan from walking away. You would think that when Jonathan keeps looking back at him, like, what are you looking at, dude? But he doesn't lean down and look in the mirror. And you would just think that, if it was that crazy of a thing, that maybe, terrible time for the street cleaner to come past my house. I hope you couldn't hear that awful noise. You would think that John would look down into the mirror and notice. But if you look in the Spanish version, Van Helsing carefully positions himself beside the mirror, and he's waiting for Dracula to move into position. And he purposely turns the mirror around. He already has suspicions from the way that Dracula is acting that he might be the vampire. And of course, Van Helsing, just like in the book, already knows. He already knows that it is a vampire. But he has to build up the belief of others, because otherwise he will have no allies in this. Van Helsing is staying very close by because he's already had the idea. He knows what he's doing. Now, I know that in the dialogue, Van Helsing does say, I stumbled across this thing, and I hope that you would be able to confirm it for me. But I think that's subtext. In the English version, they play it literally. I don't think it's meant to be played literally. I think it's subtext. I think Van Helsing is a smart enough guy that he knew what to look for. And look at this. He's positioning the mirror. He is deliberately doing this. Whereas in the English version, maybe he was deliberately looking at the mirror, but it's played like an accident. In fact, Van Helsing, even the 5th time he looks in the mirror, looks amazed at what he's seeing. And if he suspected it, I don't think he'd be as amazed. In the Spanish version, he looks more anxious, more worried. But he doesn't look surprised. That's the key, I think, to playing this moment and playing it right. Van Helsing, remember in the book, came knowing by the time he got there and examined the wounds, he knew that he had a 99% chance that this was a vampire. And he knew that he was the only one believing it. It's not until chapter 15, when he convinces Seward. And chapter 16, I believe, is when he convinces the others. And he has to make them promise, like, guys, you have to come with me. I'm not talking out my ear here. Come with me, and you will see for yourself that Lucy rises from the grave. And then you will believe. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I want you to just come with me. If I'm wrong, then go with me and prove I'm wrong. And I think that's one of the great things about Van Helsing as a character. Look at that great little shrug that Dracula gives you. Oh, yeah, sure. That'd be my pleasure. And you get a certain irritance from the Count in this. He seems irritated with Van Helsing, just like he did with Renfield. But I think that this is one of the moments where the Spanish version shines again. Watch the comparison in these moments. The Spanish Dracula is so in control that it takes him a moment to realize he's been undone. The English Dracula seems insecure because he instantly knows the problem and swats it out. Like he knew there was something that could happen. The Spanish version, look, he takes a long moment to realize that somebody has figured him out. And then he grabs the cane and wham! He is not just violently knocking. I mean, they say in both versions he acts like a caged animal. But in the Spanish version, he looks like he's about ready to beat somebody. But in the Spanish version, the anger builds. And now everybody's looking at him suspicious. We can tell because we get these great close-ups of everybody looking at him. I love Van Helsing's eyes in this production. He has this great look, this great intense look. He just has this amazing look, doesn't he? Gosh, I love the actors in both of these films. But the Spanish actors, they never fail to impress me. Given aside the fact that Juan looks like he's played by a 12-year-old boy. That's another thing. Let's talk about Juan versus John for a moment, okay? John, in the English version, is one of the most insufferable characters I've ever seen. If he's like your favorite character in fiction, more power to you. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But to me, he's just a tool. He whines all the time. He is not a man of action. He just whines all the time. And a lot of that comes down to the acting. Okay, I'm not saying this guy isn't a great actor or anything like that. I'm just saying the way he's played in the English-speaking version, David Manners plays him like a whiny bitch. And I don't mean that in any kind of mean way. I'm just saying that's the way he's played. Both versions, Mina is lured out on the lawn, but in the English version, it's like she's going out for a nighttime stroll. In the Spanish version, it's like she's under a trance. And again, that tight dress, it gives her a sense, in the wide shots especially, almost a nude quality to the upper part of her body, which it just accentuates the sexuality. Where the English version, Mina's dress is very loose. It's very modest. I feel like playing up that sexual element actually was a great help to the Spanish version. Not because it needed sex to market itself like a lot of modern movies do, but because it needed to accentuate the fact that these women were being preyed upon by a predatorial male. It's the same metaphor as Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood, when you get down to it, is both a metaphor for women being predatorially pursued by men, and also a cautionary tale. I really love how Renfield in the Spanish version sits like that. That's just so funny. And he has to be kind of dragged out of the chair. Like he doesn't really want to be pulled upright where he's more vulnerable. What a great smile, huh? Now, I do like the anxiety of Dwight Frye in the English version, and he plays that excellently. But the more realistic performance is just overall the Spanish version. Even when he freaks out, I mean, look at Dwight Frye over there freaking out over seeing the bat. It's very much a stage performance. And Renfield in the Spanish version is begging for his soul of Van Helsing, and this is important. He's saying, save me, save me, save me, please save me. I'm just weak. You're strong. I'm crazy. You're sane. You can save my soul. And Van Helsing promises him he will save his soul. I shall save you. But you must do everything I tell you. Now, that is just beautiful setup for the ending, and you're going to get what I'm talking about in a minute. Now, coming up in a moment, the bat is going to appear, and I want you to notice, again, just how much more realistic the Spanish reaction is in terms of that bat. Dwight Frye was backing away. Again, it looks like a stage performance. But the Spanish production, in his reaction, it's so real and so shocking, and it almost acts as a jump scare because his scream is so sudden. I love this performance. Juan in the background, he has such a baby face. I think that it's really an element of the film that works great is just the dynamic between these two actors. Look at Dracula, Van Helsing, and Renfield. The dynamic between these three characters. They just all have such an interesting quality about the way they react to each other. Now, again, let's talk a little bit about Juan. Juan has the same sort of anxious involvement that I've been constantly saying throughout this film. It's just great. He acts like a real lover, a real fiance. He's desperately concerned, but he at the same time he knows that the people around him mean good. And so when he says he's calling the police, he seems scared. He seems scared out of his mind when he says it. The English version, he just sounds whiny. You know, he really does. He just sounds whiny. He goes, Mina's coming with me. Yes, this nightmare will be over because Mina's coming with me. Mina, are you packing your bags? Well, what of it, Dr. Stewart? Is Mina coming with me? I mean, he just is so whiny. I also love that moment. In the English version, he says, you will die in torment if you don't tell us. And Renfield goes, no. God will not condemn an innocent man. But in the Spanish version, he says, you will die in torment if you don't tell us, with all that innocent blood on your soul. And Renfield goes, no. Like, he has to believe that God won't condemn him. He can't believe that he's going to go to hell for this. It's too much for him and his poor little deranged mind to take. Look at that. I mean, look at that desperation. That is a man that is truly on the verge of losing it. You know, if he ever had it, he's going to lose it. And Pablo Rubio is just exceptional in this role, isn't he? Watch this. Tell us before it's too late. Tell us, Renfield. Tell us. You have to tell us. Just let us know. You have to before your soul is damned for all eternity. And he goes, yes, I'll tell you. Ah! The bad scream. Look at that face. That is the face of a man who knows he's screwed. That is the face of a man who knows he is screwed completely. And he's just screaming that he's been faithful to him. Desperately trying to avoid... It's sad. It's sadder in the Spanish version because you get the feeling of a man who knows he is damned either way. He's damned if he does it. He's damned if he doesn't. And I mean that literally. To hell. He is damned. Either in this life or the next. And yeah, this is a great point of comparison. Look at this. Great creepy moment. It's far creepier, really, the way that Dwight Frye laughs and the maid passes out. Now we see both Renfields crawl towards the lady, and for some unfathomable reason, the English version cuts away too soon. Watch this. He comes up to the lady, and he raises his hand, like he's going to do something, and it cuts. God knows what he does to that poor woman, but we never find out. The maid in the next scene that she's in is perfectly fine. But the suspense is grand, because it's leading up. He's coming up to her. He's going to do something. What is he going to do? Oh! He was just trying to get a fly on her face. That's both funny and horrifying. Because the suspense was there, leading to God knows what. And then it cuts away. And now we're left in suspense that is never paid off. Because the maid is fine in the next scene. It's never told to us that Renfield does anything. But in the Spanish version, it's made very clear that it was a moment built up, but now we get a little moment of levity. And it acts in a second way as to make us feel doubly sorry for Renfield. He's so sad and so desperate and so uncontrolled to himself of what he is doing and what he must do, that it makes him seem all the more pathetic and sad. And again, because of the way the Spanish version ends, it's important that we don't hate Renfield. We have to feel bad for him from beginning to end. We get this nice little scene here where we know for certain that Mina is safe, or Ava is safe. Then we get another little comedy relief moment where Renfield has escaped again, and Martin is looking around for him, trying to find him. It's a cute little moment. It doesn't really do anything except add character for Juan and Martin, but it is cute. It is a cute moment, and it does emphasize the idea that it's funny that everybody now is going around looking for vampires, including the guy who owns the sanatorium. It is kind of crazy. And Martin, of course, says that great line, I'll go to work at another asylum where everybody's nice and calm. Let them think they're Napoleon, something worthy of my time. That's just hilarious, Why not, Now we get here a setup that is much better paid off in the Spanish version. We see the woman in white, a vampiress, who is going around the countryside, and we are about to hear from Martin and Martine, respectively, that this lady, who of course in this English version we see more clearly is Lucia, or Lucy in the English version, has been preying on young women and young men, young boys, young babies even. And she has been biting their necks. And although the children are fine, nobody's died yet, she has been preying on them. Now, in the book, she is called the bloofer lady. She's also referred to as the lady in black at one point, although when they find her, it's really unclear. There's sort of an implication that she might be dressed in white, but it's not really clear. But they never call her the lady in white, not in the book. In the English and Spanish versions, they refer to her as the lady in white. Now, I like that in the English version, we see Van Helsing talking to Mina about Lucy and the lady in white. But it comes across much more casually because Mina just seems a little bit more like almost in a daze. But in the Spanish version, she's in tears. It's breaking her heart to think that this lady she saw was Lucy, and that Lucia is undead, that she's wandering damned through the countryside. I also think that Van Helsing seems a lot more genuinely concerned about Ava than Van Helsing seems about Mina. You know, his facial expressions and everything, he just seems far more like he genuinely cares and is listening to what Mina or Ava is saying in the Spanish version. And Mina confirms, of course, Lucia is the lady in white. So now Van Helsing knows what he has to do, what he had to do in the book, in I believe chapter 17. Now, I particularly like the way these two moments are played differently. Both are very good, but I think the Spanish moment is a little bit more powerful just because of the staging, the camera angles, the choice of shots, the fact that all of these things are happening in close-ups and twofers. They're not happening in big, wide shots where you can barely see the actor's eyes. They're happening relatively close. So you see, Ava tells Juan, "No, you cannot touch me." About the same time, Mina is saying, "No, John, you can never touch me again. Our wedding plans, our love, everything, it's all over." And in both versions, she asks the professor to explain, to make him understand why they can never be together now. Because she knows that Van Helsing knows what is happening. In the Spanish version, he sort of shrugs, shakes his head, and walks away. Like, it's not my story to tell. In the English version, he just kind of stands up and walks away, and it seems a little bit like, almost like he's, unable to hear her, like he's in a trance or something. So I far prefer this version. And then, of course, the close-up. Again, look at that close-up. It's a very close shot. Hips and above. Whereas in the English version, it's ankles and above. I mean, good golly, I cannot even see where John is looking. He could be looking right past her for all I know. I really wouldn't be able to tell you. And that's one of the great things about the Spanish version. You get such a connection to these people because you can see them. It's so important. And again, I hope that it doesn't come across like I'm just ratting on the English version, because I love the English version. I really do. Now watch this moment. It becomes a tracking shot where they walk inside, and John comes up and just talks to him as Van Helsing is closing the door. But in this version, he opens the door specifically to point outside. That's what you should be worried about, man. You are crazy. You are not worrying about the one thing that could actually cause trouble in this situation. Whereas in the English version, he's very calm. And there goes John acting like a whiny baby. "Mina, pack your bags. You're coming with me." It's like Mina has no autonomy in the English version. And in the Spanish version, she's very clear about what she is doing. She's much stronger. Whereas Mina is... See, look at his whiny face. The way he looks is whiny. "I'll be downstairs waiting." And Mina's like, "John." But in this version, it's established. Mina's like, Ava is, "I'm not going. We're gonna face this. I have to stay here. You just don't understand, Juan." And then they just start ignoring Juan. They start acting like he's not there. And I think that's far more powerful a statement. This has been settled. You have no more to say in the matter. Again, a nice waist and above, hips and above close-up of Van Helsing giving orders. Then Juan leaves the room. He's not having it. Under no circumstances must those windows be open during the night. Now, in the book, it was garlic. More traditionally, what you think of. So it's kind of funny that the Wolfsbane caught on more in terms of the Wolfman by Universal, and not in terms of Dracula. And garlic has remained the quintessential thing to drive vampires away. It's kind of curious, isn't it? And, of course, there he is with his top hat and tails and holding his gloves in his hands like a real sophisticated aristocratic gentleman. Here he is again. Now, of course, the dialogue is so vague in the English version that I think it might have also been one of the scenes that was edited out of sequence. I told you before that that scene that happened in the English version would be replayed in the Spanish version. But I actually think it makes far more sense to put it in context here than it did in the English version. Because now we see Renfield on the very last verge of going insane, the very end of his wit. He just cannot continue. He cannot continue on like this. His entire life has become really such an absolute struggle for survival between the powers of good and evil. He just can't hold up anymore. He can't last. And of course, you see that sad. I mean, it almost makes me want to cry for this guy. You know, oh, Master, you came back. You know, he gets the idea that he felt abandoned. Oh gosh, Carlos Valerius with those eyes. You know, he really does have eyes very similar to Bela Lugosi's eyes in the English version. Very powerful. In fact, maybe a little closer to Karloff's eyes. It's a shame that we didn't see more of him in English-speaking productions, because I think he could have been a great Hollywood actor. You know, easily on par with Boris Karloff. And, of course, in the English version, at this point, he is coming out of his coffin to go and suck the blood of the living. But in the Spanish version, we get to see this excellent performance by Pablo Rubio as he begs his master not to go through with it. Now, I do want to point out something. In the English version, you might have just seen, we have never seen Dracula get out of his coffin. The camera pans away, and he's just kind of out of it. We never see him, I guess because they couldn't find a dignified way for him to get out of the coffin. But in the Spanish version, every time he gets out, there's a puff of smoke that comes out, and then he stands up as if he's standing off of his knees, like he's been squatting down. And then the coffin closes. So we don't see him step out of it. It's almost as though he was already out of it. It's pretty cool. And honestly, I like the way it's played there a lot better, because there's no real motivation for the camera to pan away. I actually think it would have worked better to use that panning effect when Lucy was being bitten, as if it was so horrifying that even the camera didn't want to look at it, and so the camera had to turn away. A little bit like Hitchcock did in the movie Marnie. There's a rape scene in that movie where the camera moves away, and we just hear it happening. It's like, it's so horrible that the camera doesn't even want to see it. Like you would in real life. You wouldn't be able to, if you couldn't stop it, you wouldn't be able to watch it. Now, I love the fact that Renfield is always creeping in. Before he was listening in the bushes, now he's listening at the door. In the English version, he just kind of wanders in periodically. But I like the fact that he keeps getting caught. It's actually his own ridiculous need for, his ridiculous curiosity, his ridiculous need to know what is happening that keeps getting him caught and dragged into the room. Whereas Renfield in the English version, I don't really know what his end game is. Like, he just kind of comes in periodically, he just wanders in, and then he tells them things he shouldn't be telling them, and then he wonders why his master would be mad at him. And then, in this scene, again, he's like, I'm not going to tell them anything, master. Well, why would you wander in and start talking to them to begin with? In the Spanish version, they fix that issue by having him being an eavesdropper who gets caught and dragged into the room and interrogated. And that works far, far better. In both versions, they call Martin and Martine. Get a quick cut to Mina laying in bed. She swats away the wolfsbane by accident, or the nameless ancient Transylvanian herb, whatever it is in the Spanish version. The nurse lays it back up, so we see that people are attending her. And everything, seems like it's going to be okay. Now, when Martine gets the call, I want you to notice something. Martin in the original gets the call, he tells the nurses what's going on, and he runs away, and the camera starts to move with him, but it cuts very abruptly. And I wonder if this wasn't a part of the English version and they cut it. But look in the Spanish version, he comes in to the cell where Renfield had been kept, and boom. Look at that. You know, maybe I should have timed it better. Boom! Look at that. I thought it was going to cut quicker. Sorry, my bad. Now, in the Spanish version, look, he's putting the nurse under a trance. And this is what I was talking about. That scene that was out of order in the English version. I think that this is where that shot was supposed to have come from, was the way they filmed it in the English version. Because now we're seeing him put the nurse under a spell, into a trance, and saying, you know, whatever I want you to do, you will do it. I don't even have to speak for you now. You obey my will. And so now the nurse is going to go back in, and we're going to see how this pans out for Dracula. Now, something else you'll notice in this film, and it also was the case in the book, was that the legend that vampires could not enter your home unless invited, that came much later. Something else you'll notice is that although they keep the property that in the book, he must rest during the daylight hours, a vampire can go out in the daytime. Sunlight will not kill a vampire. That is important because that legend was not actually a legend. It came into being because of movies. Isn't that funny? You would think that, you know, with most anything related to something like vampires, that it would have to have come about during the evolution of that legend. But actually, no. Movies play a much bigger part than you would think. The movie Nosferatu, the silent movie, the classic movie with Count Orlok, he was the first vampire to be killed by sunlight. Pretty crazy, huh? Now Renfield explains why he's no longer seeking his redemption. Actually, the master came to him in the night and told him that it was all going to be okay. He's not mad at him. He still promised him millions of rats to have. All those lives for him to consume. I think another important thing about Renfield is that you have to remember that, at least in this adaptation, Renfield is meant to be sort of a tragic character. And so at the end of both English and Spanish, when he's begging for his life from Dracula, he's not begging for his life because he wants to live. He specifically says, I can't die with all those innocent lives on my conscience. And I think it's important to notice that his life, his mind is so far gone that he is talking about the insects that he has killed. The blood of the insects that he has killed. He is not thinking about the blood of the men on the ship that died. And he's certainly not thinking about anybody in London because he hasn't really helped Dracula do that much. Remember, he didn't start escaping from the asylum until after Lucia died, which means that he didn't help with her death. And that is an important thing to keep in mind with his character. I also like that he gives a little bit of a worried look when Martine comes into the room. Like, even for... Oh, this is a great line. He twisted and broke the iron bars as if they were toothpicks. Now, he didn't break those bars. He bent them. But in the English version, one of the best lines ever written in cinema happens when Martin comes in and says, he bent the bars of his cell as though they were cheese. Why on God's green earth you would compare bending iron to cheese? Who bends cheese? It's just awesome, though. Now, Bela Lugosi is framed much more threateningly in this, but I do still kind of like the way that Van Helsing acts better. If you could cobble these two together with Bela Lugosi's Dracula in the scene and Eduardo's performance as Van Helsing, I think you actually could come up with something of like the ultimate Dracula. Not to say that Edward Van Sloan isn't great, and he's a great classic actor, but I just find the chemistry, the rivalry between the Spanish Van Helsing and Dracula more compelling and more interesting. A lot of it's shot in these tight close-ups, and it really feels like two people who are, on the verge of dueling or something. Like they are, they're just absolutely wrought with hatred for each other. Whereas in the English version, it's very polite. Now, notice in the English version, Dracula is already attempting to put a spell on Van Helsing, to put him under his spell, to put him in a trance. Now, that moment happens in the Spanish version later, and I'm going to cut back to this and show this clip again so that we can compare the two side by side. But for now, we see that Van Helsing denies him. Dracula says, "Come here," and he won't move. And then after a moment, he says it a couple more times, and Van Helsing starts to step forward. He takes 3 or 4 steps, and then he catches himself. And then, even as Dracula pulls his hand forward, tightening his grip, and it seems symbolically to show that his will over Van Helsing is grappling tighter, but Van Helsing resists, and he pulls back. It's literally a battle of wills. I think that is just brilliant. That is genius. It's not in the book. And he approaches Van Helsing. Van Helsing reaches into his pocket. He's fingering the crucifix in his hand. He's ready to pull it out. And Dracula says, more wolfsbane. And he says, more than wolfsbane. Bam! Pulls out the cross. And he runs away. Now, I think that moment is brilliant. I think it's genius. And I've always highly respected that moment. But we're going to come back to the Spanish version of it, too. It really is a matter of taste. It really is. It's just whatever you prefer. And honestly, I love so much. I love both of them that I can't ever pick which one I like the best. John comes to the nurse. The nurse is saying that Mina won't listen. And I want you to notice something here. Look at the direct comparison. You can see clean through the top of that dress. It's a low cut. Whenever she bends over, you can see almost everything. I mean, just barely get by with it, sort of everything. Craziness. But look, although Mina is wearing a shinier dress, a more glamorous dress, it's the same type of dress she's worn the whole movie. But the idea that she's becoming more sexually promiscuous over time, it shows symbolically the hunger for blood as well. But the English version, even look at her, even now she has her hands over her chest a lot in this sequence. And I really hate that. I really think they should have gone with something a little closer to the Spanish version. They could have gotten by with it. Make no mistake, they could have gotten by with it. This was pre-code. I'm not saying they need to put her in a dress like in the Spanish version. You don't have to see through it. Dress her a little bit like the love interest in the Universal version of The Mummy. Where very little is left to imagination, but it is still covering. Do something like that, because it keeps alive that sensuality. There is something sexy about vampires to most people, I think. Because, the idea of this dominating personality, coming in and they're all they want is you. They just want you. And how do they make contact with you? By biting your neck. There's something intensely sexual about that. And I think it's no mistake that vampires have become sort of sex symbols in our time. And I don't mean to go around that too much or go on that path too far, because there are limits to everything, certainly. I don't want it to be the Francis Ford Coppola version where the brides of Dracula are completely topless. There's an in-between. And I think that the Spanish production is that in-between. It's fully embracing the fact that Juan should find her more sexy. Just like people, sort of find Dracula sexy in a way. And I think that that's one of the great things about this. Juan is almost lured in. Lured in by her feminine wiles. Notice in both versions, they have this line, which is very similar to the line in It's a Wonderful Life. There's so many stars and they seem so close. Would you like me to grab a handful of them for you? Yeah, it's very similar to that line about the lassoing the moon, Would you like me to offer you a handful of them? That's a brilliant line. Good golly. Smooth as glass. Juan is just smooth as glass. That man could charm the pants off any lady. But John, all he can hope to do is get him drunk from all the wine he has. That was silly. I apologize. I have to apologize. It was such a bad joke. Okay, so here we have the synced up version of these moments. Now notice Van Helsing actually looks scared. Like he realizes that what's coming and that he might be unable to fight it off. He reaches for his pocket and he's starting to get the crucifix. Stop! No, don't! So in this, Dracula is smart enough to realize what Van Helsing is going for. And so you think in this moment, Van Helsing is completely under Dracula's spell. Oh no, Dracula has won. There's no fighting it now. There's nothing can be done. Who can possibly fight him if even Van Helsing is powerless to his will? Ah! It is terrifying. It is scary. It gives you a moment of hopelessness that both films are surprisingly lacking of. He's going to lean down, and Dracula's going to tell him to take whatever's in his pocket and put it in the box. He's disarming Van Helsing. Now look, now the tables have turned. As soon as Dracula's face is hidden, look at this. Have you obeyed me? Van Helsing lies, and then wham! Cross to the face. Excellent. Excellently done. I couldn't tell you which one of these two moments I like better. Because I love the fact that Van Helsing is so in control of his will in both versions. But I kind of like the fact that he is actually so in control that he can punk Dracula. That's pretty awesome. And then at the end, he looks exhausted. Now, look at this. I hate this moment in the original English production. I love it in the Spanish version. In the English, he's swatting the bat and saying, "Careful, it might get in your hair." She's going, "Yes, yes." And he's going, "Careful. Wow, I can't reach it." "Yes, yes." It's comical. And in the Spanish production, the bat squeaks for a long time and she says, "Yes, I will." And Juan immediately notices she said something and said, "What?" In the English version, she is saying it for like a minute and he does nothing. He doesn't even notice. And it just, again, makes John look like a dummy. Now, I do like that Van Helsing shows up earlier in their conversation in this. Of course, I've synced them slightly by having the English version of the Battle of Wills scene. So, in actuality, watching these movies at the same time, Van Helsing comes in just a little bit earlier than you would expect. Mina, or Ava in this version, just has so much more personality in the Spanish production. I mean, she's a very strong character, very strong-willed character, and she makes some very definite choices in terms of acting, whereas in the English version, I don't know, Mina just seems like very dull. The way she's written isn't that different, but the way she's played seems more like a plank of wood. You know, she just seems less interesting. It's a little bit like watching Kevin Costner in, well, any movie he's ever been in. Now watch how the difference in this moments are played. In the English, even though John reacts like he knows she's about to bite him, he wrestles the cross away from Van Helsing and acts like he's done something wrong. But in the Spanish, he pushes Mina away, gets away from her, and then when Van Helsing comes in, he's actually on Van Helsing's side. And it's just another one of those choices in terms of how to play these characters that makes Juan so much more likable. Because John is such a dummy in the whole film, and he's a whiny dummy. There's just very little to be likable about him. And so when Juan makes a dumb decision in the Spanish version, you know, it's somewhat more understandable because he's a likable character who's made relatable decisions. But the idea that that all this craziness is happening and you're going to kidnap your girlfriend is just a bad look on anybody. And especially on John. But Juan is such an innocent, lovable character that you can accept his decisions a lot more. And he just doesn't overall act like a real jerkwad for the rest of the film. Whereas John is just somebody, even as a kid, I remember hating John. I just really did not like his character. Which is a shame, because in the book, Jonathan Harker is one of my favorite characters. So we see Martine and Martin are both hunting the vampire bat. We get two very different ways of playing the same joke. In the English version, Martin says, to his nurse friend, "I think they're all crazy. You and I are the only ones that are sane, and sometimes I wonder about you." In the English versions, he says, "Yes," and he walks away slowly like, "I was right, you are crazy." But in the Spanish version, he says it, and she laughs at first, and then he says, "And sometimes I have my doubts about you," and she's insulted and walks away. And he's just cracking up to himself. And that, I think, is a little bit more in character with Martin. Now we see, we get a lot more little establishing shots in the English production where we show things like, the little music box in Lucia's room or the clock in Mina's room just now. We get a little more establishing shots like that, but really they don't really serve much of a point. They don't ultimately serve to establish much of anything. Even the time of night is not really necessary for us to know, so seeing the clock it's kind of useless. Now, if you watch here, the maid in the Spanish version goes over and removes the wolfsbane. Then she takes it, puts it in a little pot, right? Now watch what happens in the English version. You see that the maid has left the room, right? She's put the wolfsbane in that little drawer, right? Outside of the room. Now she comes back in. She lets Dracula in. And just observe what happens here. We see the door is open. He comes right up to the door, right? The maid is still standing behind the porch door. I think right there was where that missing shot was supposed to come from. Now, I do like the Spanish production's version of this moment better, too, because the nurse simply comes out as if she's done for the night watching her and comes and sits at the table. And they realize everything's okay. In the English version, he doesn't even question what is happening in his sick daughter's room, that the nurse just comes out, puts something in a drawer, and then goes back in. I also like that in the Spanish version, he wakes her up to put her under the trance so that he can take her with him. Now, observe here. The Spanish version. Cemetery gates that we saw before where Lucy, as the white lady, or the lady in white, was walking around, right? We hear screaming. Bloody screaming. And then out of the mist, we see Van Helsing and Juan. They come out having just presumably killed Lucia the vampire. And they both seem heavy-hearted with what they've had to do. But he assures him it was a good thing that we did. We had to drive a stake through her heart, or she would have suffered for the rest of eternity. But now her soul will rest in peace. Of course, they make the sign of the cross. And now they say, we're going to go to the Abbey now. They're looking for a Dracula, right? But in the English version, it's amazing. Just Van Helsing and John, are just walking. They're just outside of what is never told to us to be a cemetery gate. We never hear that they staked Lucy, which means that the subplot with the lady in white is never resolved. Never. It's never resolved. Lucy just goes on killing babies for the rest of eternity in the English-speaking version. This close-up of Renfield might be my favorite shot in the whole film. It's just a beautiful shot. There's just something about the way Pablo Rubio plays that moment. It's just exquisite. Exquisitely well done. Excellent performance from everybody, but especially from him. I also prefer that Dracula carries Ava down the stairs because throughout the English version, every step she takes, it looks like she's trying not to trip. It's super distracting. And now, you want to see the culmination of the total toolage of John in the English version. They have the element of surprise, and he just starts yelling, "Mina!" through the window and gives the game away. Even Van Helsing looks a little bit upset that it's happened. Whereas at least in the Spanish production, when he says Ava, it's not the cherry on top of a absolute jerkwad cake. It's a person who made one mistake throughout the movie. You know, there's just something about it that's far better, I think, in terms of how it's handled. His character, that is. How his character's handled in the Spanish version. Because in the English version, he is insufferable. I like both versions of Renfield to death. I think the stunt work with Dwight Frye is incredible. Look at that, falling down there. But there is just an unbelievably nasty sound effect when Dracula throws Renfield off the side of the stairs and he hits the ground. It goes, boom, and he goes, ugh. It is one of the most horrific sound effects I've ever heard. But I also love the stunt work of the guy who rolled down the stairs. I have to really admire that. That's really well done. But of course, the thing about it is, in the English production, Renfield is forgotten. He's just completely forgotten about. We never even hear his name again. Whereas in the Spanish version, Van Helsing doesn't forget his promise to save him. And it's a big deal to me that that happens. Well, you can't make me love a character and then completely forget about them. I need to know what happened. Now, this is a moment that we hear about in the English version, but the Spanish version shows us. And that's another strength of the Spanish version. It shows more than it tells. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's so much more cinematic. There's something just fantastic about seeing these moments before we hear about them. I think that's part of the fun of vampire stories is it's not like the Wolfman or something like that where it's pure horror. John even runs like a girl. He's a very wussy character. One, he walks like a man. I love the fact that vampires have an attractive element to them. You know, there's nothing really that attractive for the victims of the Invisible Man. The victims of the Wolfman are not attracted to the wolf. The victims of the Frankenstein monster are not attracted to him. But there's something about an aristocratic gentleman who can walk into society and nobody even notice that death is coming for them. That is pretty gnarly to me. I so really love the fact that, once again, for some strange reason, the coffins are not the same. We see Dracula in a different coffin in the Spanish version than we see in the English version. And I think it comes down to that George Melford just knew how to shoot a scene better than Tod Browning. Although I love several of Tod Browning's films, I just think that he was not the best director for this. And honestly, not even really that good a director in this. This was hardly the thing I would want to introduce anybody to his work through. I also enjoy that John loses his hat in the English version. He comes over and picks that thing up, and his hat falls off. I always wondered why. Like, what was it? Why was that so important that had to happen? Both versions equally dramatic and equally good when it comes to saying she's not here. But look at this. John just throws that big heavy metal thing right on top of the coffin. Hope we don't wake Dracula up. Now this is another thing. Look, the staking is from a distance in the English versions. You saw that right before it clicked off. But in the Spanish version, it's close up. And we see it, wham, right about to happen. So the horror comes from what we think we might see. Now, this is important. Spanish Mina was less under a trance and more just unable to scream in fear. Maybe she was in a trance, but it's less obvious. English Mina looks kind of like she's getting a little turned on by Dracula being killed. And I've always thought that was super distracting. Why they couldn't have had her look a little bit different. Whereas Ava is very much terrified. Even the romance scenes are shot more intimately. There's a little bit less of a arm's length approach to them. We either see them in close-up or we see them from super far away like this. But we don't ever see them in that like medium, don't get too close sort of angle, which we see a lot in the English production. And now you see, even the way they film her in that dress has become more humble. There's a little bit more of a humility to everything now. It's less sexualized. like the spell is broken. Now we see that that Spanish Renfield is going to have something done to save his soul. Van Helsing says, I will make good on my promise to Renfield. Whereas in the English version, Van Helsing just says, you go ahead, I'll follow you later. And we never find out what Van Helsing does. But in the Spanish version, look at this final shot. This is beautiful. We see Van Helsing standing over the body of Renfield, maybe praying for him, maybe readying to stake him as well. Who knows? But whatever happens, we know that Renfield will have a happier ending. So that is the English and Spanish productions of Dracula, side by side, something that I've never seen anybody else do. Maybe it's for copyright reasons. I really can't say why nobody else has done this. But it's something that I just thought was wrought with possibility, to be able to actually see these two films, not just watch them back to back like I've done my whole life, but to finally see them in all their glory, side by side, on equal footing. Man, I couldn't be more pleased with the results. So I hope you guys enjoy it too. I hope you'll join me for the rest of the month of October as we talk about some more of my favorite classic movie monsters. They just don't make them like they used to. Ain't that the case? We're going to have a look back at some of those great ones and appreciate them and enjoy them for all of their magnificence. So join me with that, and I'll see you guys in the next one. God bless.